It's almost time! It's warming up and gardeners are getting excited about planting season. But before we make that trip to the garden center, there's a few things you're gonna wanna do to avoid garden regret. So let's get it. 6 mistakes gardeners regret doing in spring. If you're like me, you literally cannot wait to get your hands on some new plants in the spring. When it starts to warm up, that's when I start thinking I can sneak these plants outside. When it's warm out, it seems like it's gonna be warm forever. That's it, we're done with winter. But I live in the Midwest. I'm supposed to know it's gonna get cold. We have at least 3 or 4 spring fakeouts, plus mud season. We haven't even gotten to mud season yet, so there's no way. But we've all done it. We've planted too early. I have done this almost every single year that I've been a gardener. I have no self-control, it just happens, and it's one of my biggest regrets. When I plant too early, of course there's a big freeze that comes and kills my baby plants every single year. So sometimes I plant some cold hardy plants outside and I think, sure, they'll be fine. And yes, they often do survive if it snows on them, but that's even worse. Sometimes they're stunted and then it just takes even longer for them to grow than if I had just waited. It takes them forever to recover and get to full size. So there have been times that I actually made it take longer by planting them too early. Part of the problem is that garden centers know that we can't wait and they sell these plants in April. If you live in like Wisconsin, you know that you can't even plant until the middle of May. Some of us don't plant until after Memorial Day. Prince is from Minnesota and he knows we have to wait to plant tomatoes. So this year I'm gonna hold back and hopefully not plant my plants too early. There's another garden center temptation that really is a trap and a lot of us don't even realize it. Nurseries know that when we do our shopping, our eyes are drawn to bright colors, pretty flowers, to the most impressive thing we see. It's basic marketing and they know how to make those plants look good so they sell. They grow these perennials in a greenhouse so that they actually bloom early and they make a big show on the store shelf. Well, the truth is, unless they're annuals, buying plants that are already in bloom isn't really the best time to buy perennials. Sure, things like petunias and impatiens are going to have little blooms on them and they're going to grow throughout the season. But if you're buying perennials like phlox, coneflowers, you don't really want the plants to be in bloom because it kind of means that they're halfway done by the time you get them in the ground. I make an effort to try to buy some plants that have buds on them, but that the buds haven't opened and they're not flowering yet. That means that I'm going to get the benefit of the full flowering season for that perennial. I want to enjoy the full bloom time. It's kind of like a bouquet of roses. If you're giving them away as a gift, you want them to look spectacular immediately, so you're going to want to get roses that are already completely open. But if you want them for home and you want to enjoy them for a longer period of time, you're going to want to get some that have their buds still almost a little bit closed. This way they last longer than a bouquet of flowers that are already at their peak. The next one is a doozy of a regret because it makes such a difference in long-term garden success. It's actually so important that I'm going to make a whole video about it. And this garden regret is what I call designing your garden backwards. This is when we choose the plants first because we've fallen in love with the way the plant looks, and then we try to fit it into our garden without considering if our garden has the conditions for that plant to thrive. Maybe we're excited about a plant because it has beautiful flowers, and then we plant it in our shade garden and it never blooms again. You have beautiful blooms for the first year, but then when we plant it in our shade garden, it only blooms for one season, and then for years and years, it never blooms again, and we just keep trying to get it to bloom and to thrive, and for some reason it never blooms again. Or maybe we pick a plant that actually has high water needs, but the only space that we have left is under the eaves of the house, and so we spend all of our time out there 3 times a week watering and watering to make sure that it thrives because it's in a dry spot now. This is a big garden regret, and the solution to this is to look at the conditions of your garden soil, look at the location, how many sun hours does it really get, how dry or moist is the soil, and then choose plants that match those conditions instead of choosing the plants first and then trying to fit them into less than ideal conditions. It's much easier to choose a different plant than to choose to have different soil, different rain, or different sun hours. I call this changing the earth and the sky. So it's much easier to choose a different plant than to try to change the earth and the sky in your garden. The next garden regret is going to be a little bit controversial, but it needs to be talked about. Technology is not always bad, but it is getting a little tricky nowadays. So when we browse social media, like Pinterest, for example, we're looking for garden ideas, maybe ideas for different kinds of flowers, and we're gonna run into some problems. The first problem with getting inspiration from pictures online is that sometimes the plant that we see does not grow well in our garden. Or maybe even worse, it ends up being invasive. I'm looking at you, Chinese wisteria. Do not plant this in North America. Sometimes you can't even get the plant you like, and it was actually a waste of time to try to figure out what the plant is. The other problem with finding inspiration on social media is falling into the trap of AI-generated images. I'll admit it, I've fallen for some of these myself. I can't tell you how many fake AI-generated images of plants and flowers are floating around on Facebook. These are not real plants. They are not real flowers. Sometimes scammers will try to sell seeds for these fake flowers that don't exist, or these flowers with a cat face on them. 10 out of 10, I would buy these, but they're not real. This isn't a real flower, so if it looks too good to be true, it probably is. You can be a savvy shopper and avoid these scammy seeds. Instead, if you learn about the plants that grow well in your area, you can avoid this entirely. Follow YouTubers that are local to your region that can show you what types of plants really thrive in your area. And you always want to be skeptical of something that looks a little bit too good to be true, like these flowers that look like my old friend Fizzy. Yeah. It can be hard resisting all the plants pulling at our heartstrings all the time, but having a plan when you're ready to purchase your plants will save you a ton of time and heartache and money. One thing we struggle with when we don't really have a garden plan is buying too many different kinds of plants. This is really only my opinion and not everyone agrees with me, but I think buying 5 or 7 of the same type of plant will make a way bigger big implants. Buying 5 or 7 of the same plant will make a way bigger impact than buying all different kinds and mixing them together. Of course, it depends on your budget, and I also do like to encourage people to have a diverse planting. Okay, let's say you have a budget for 20 plants for your new garden. Instead of getting 2 each of 10 different species, I would go for only 3 different species and then get 6 or 7 of them. Then I would take those plants and I would make large clumps or drifts of those plants. I always recommend native perennials. I'm in the American Midwest, so here's an example of a planting that I would do if I could only plant 20 plants. I would do like 7 black-eyed Susans, 7 penstemon, 2 asters because they get really big, maybe 2 goldenrod, and 2 big grasses. This way you have large clusters, they make a huge impact, and you can always add diversity as you make your garden larger because your design can be seen from far away and it looks very intentional. Now, if you want something different and you want a naturalistic meadow style look, you can mix all the different plants together. Or if you have a very large space and you want a large meadow, that is totally valid. It's just going to be a different style. Now, this one is a hard lesson. I had to learn it myself, and I want to help you avoid it if you can. A garden regret I've done many times in the past is planting too sparsely in a large area because I was trying to stretch the budget. Like I said earlier, I work with mostly North American plants, so this might be specific to our plants, but they really like to be grouped close together. They do not like to be isolated so far apart from each other. They need competition because otherwise they are too big and strong. They honestly need competition so that they don't become overgrown, too tall, flop over, and open up in the center. So now if I have 10 plants, I plant them closer together, maybe on 1 foot, 18-inch centers, and I just choose to have a smaller garden. I can always add to this garden later when I have a budget for more plants, but taking the 10 plants and then spreading them out in a large space just ends up not looking very good when you're dealing with native North American plants. They do weird things. They get floppy and weird. It's not good. Speaking of budget, I have a bonus tip for you if you really want to stretch your budget this spring, and that's to keep an eye out for neighbors who are dividing plants. Most people will be dividing things that you might not want to plant, like ditch lilies or lily of the valley, maybe vinca vines. These are plants that are very aggressive, and the only way to remove them later is to dig them out by hand. Sometimes there's a reason that people have extra and they're giving it away, so just be careful about what you accept. But if you can avoid those, a lot of people will be dividing irises, sedum, raspberries, black-eyed Susans, red bee balm, bluebells, and coneflowers. Here's a video of me making out like a bandit with a neighbor's native Solomon seal. There it is. I planted these in my sister's shady side yard, and they were gorgeous. They bloomed the very next season. If you know what to look for, gardeners are very generous people, and we love to give things away. Just make sure you don't bring home something you might regret. If you want to participate in the Real Yards series and have a chance to have your yard on the show, if you'd like some suggestions about your yard, or if you have a really nice looking native plant garden, send us some photos. We would love to share those as an example to other people how awesome your garden can look when you use native North American plants. The photos have to be in landscape or horizontal, not vertical. Let us know we have permission to use your photos for the channel. Let us know where you are. We really appreciate all your submissions. Please feel free to leave any questions you have in the comments. I'd love to answer your questions in a Q&A at the end of the month. So thank you so much for your participation and keep them coming.